Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Rachel, and I'm a marketing coordinator here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. In the coming days, we're looking forward to welcoming Chanel Miller in conversation with T. Kira Madden. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you haven't already done so, you can sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Vanessa Veselka and Kristen Arnett. Vanessa Veselka is the author of the novel Zazen, which won the Penn/Robert W. Bingham Prize. Her short stories have appeared in Tin House and ZYZZYVA, and her nonfiction GQ, The Atlantic, Smithsonian, The Atavist, and was included in Best American Essays in the anthology Bitchfest, 10 Years of Cultural Criticism. She's been at various times a teenage runaway, a sex worker, a union organizer, an independent record label owner, a train hopper, a waitress, and a mother. She lives in Portland, Oregon. The Great Offshore Grounds is a wildly original cross-country novel that subverts a long tradition of family narratives and casts new light on the mythologies, national, individual, and collective, that drive and define us. Vanessa is joined in conversation by Kristen Arnett, the New York Times bestselling author of the debut novel, Mostly Dead Things. Her work has appeared at the New York Times, North American Review, the Normal School, Guernica, BuzzFeed, Electric Literature, McSweeney's, PBS NewsHour, The Guardian, and elsewhere. Her next two books, Samson, a novel, and With Fox's Stories, will be published by Riverhead Books. This evening's event will also include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. And if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please consider upvoting that particular question. And most importantly, please consider supporting Vanessa Veselka, Kristen Arnett, and Powell's by purchasing a copy of their books. A link to buy The Great Offshore Grounds will be shared in the chat a few times this evening. And without any further ado, please welcome Vanessa and Kristen.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Kristen.
Hi.
Yeah, before I read, I'll just, I want to thank Kristen for doing this with me. She's in Florida, and, you know, it's a weird and interesting place. We're going to talk about Willie Nelson songs in libraries in Florida at some level. It has to happen. We're going to start by talking about the book, but I'm going to start by reading a section.
Yay.
So, do you have anything you want to say before that?
No, I'm excited to hear you read, so let's get to it.
Let's see if I can do it without stumbling. Okay, this is from the front of the book. Book 1, Henry Hudson. Health to buzzards, cash to the drivers, oiler for the lords, and greasy luck to the lifers. The wedding. 15 miles south of Seattle and halfway across Puget Sound to the west is Mori Island. Shaped like an arrowhead aimed at the mainland, green as the inner fold of a grass blade, it can be seen from the air, cradled in a crook of an elbow of water. Tourists ride over on ferries to watch for whales and UFOs. Jets turn around overhead on their final approach to the airport. Even on days when there is no rain, mist filters through the evergreens until it pulls apart like threadbare cloth and burns off. The wedding was to be held in the afternoon at Point Robinson, the site of an old fog signal station that once housed a steam whistle fed by coal fire and water to warn away ships. In 1897, at the dawn of massive capital expansion and speculation, the whistle sounded for 528 hours, nearly killing the man who had to shovel the 35 tons of coal. The cargo had to be kept from the rocks, and who can halt the lumbering desires of the world? In 1915, the Lighthouse, with its state-of-the-art fifth-order Fresnel lens, was built. Powered initially by oil vapor lamps, its beacon could be seen for 12 miles. The lens was the perfect manifestation of Victorian technology, replacing the simple flat lenses with faceted crystal domes, prisms cut into tiers that made it both astonishingly beautiful and a breakthrough in optics. The Fresnel lens had a theoretically infinite capacity to capture diffuse light and, by way of internal reflection, cast it like a spear through darkness. It lit stages in celluloid, Polaroid shots, and retinas for ID scans. And on Point Robinson, it lit Puget Sound. These days, every modern ship has a GPS, and the little lighthouse is just a decoration on a brochure, a destination for grade school field trips. The mechanism that rotated the original lantern remains on the first floor, which is now a tiny museum of technology, with gauges and wheels and iron bolted into the base, with lines that lead nowhere and do nothing. Back across the Sound in Seattle, Livy looked out the window of her basement apartment. Her father was getting married that afternoon, and though it was already late April, a cold, wet breeze whistled through the gaps in the caulking, turning her skin to gooseflesh. A few feet away stood her sister, Cheyenne, poorly slept but already dressed. "I'm freezing," said Cheyenne. "I'm turning on the space heater." "Turn on the oven. They charge us for electricity," said Livy. Cheyenne rolled her eyes, but went over to the little white gas stove. Cranking the temperature to broil, she leaned back against the oven door so she could feel the heat on her hamstrings while the oven warmed. Yesterday, they'd spent the whole day picking rocks out of Livy's landlord's garden in trade for a patch of soil near the sunny side of the fence so that Livy could grow food. It wasn't political. Livy didn't care about pesticides or permaculture. She was just the cheapest person Cheyenne had ever known. She lived off past state groceries. She washed her clothes once a month with a teaspoon of dish soap in a tub. She made her own bras. Cheyenne was pretty sure she would have rinsed and reused dental dams if she thought she could get away with it. Recently, Livy had become convinced that she could feed herself off 3 square yards of land. It was ridiculous, but since Cheyenne had appeared out of nowhere and moved in on her without warning or rent, she didn't have much of a say. Taller and unfreckled, Cheyenne had chosen a rose-colored cap-sleeve shirt with eyelets and a pair of black pinstripe suit pants. She could pass in the crowd they'd be in today. Her secondhand clothes came off as vintage, while her misadventures in body art made her seem a fine vase, badly cracked and chipping, but a gritty accent to any room. "Cyril didn't come to my wedding," Cheyenne said. "Why should I go to his?" "Did you invite him?" "Hell no. He would have arrived like a lord and expected to walk me down the aisle. 'Here, let me give you away.' Oh, hey, Dad, I'm pretty sure you already did that." "You're right," said Livy. "He would have." "So why are we even going?" "I have a day off work and it's cheaper than a movie. I'm tired of ramen and hot dogs and there'll be rich people food, so I'm taking Tupperware." "Please don't make it obvious," said Cheyenne. "We're already going to look so out of place." "Oh, because you have jailhouse tats of hearts and clubs on your knuckles, or because I don't shave and look like a landscaper?" Cheyenne spread fingers of her left hand. "Not just clubs and hearts. The one on my thumb is a diamond and the pinky is a spade. You just can't tell anymore." Livy crossed to where she'd laid out her newly washed blue painter's pants and pulled them up over her long johns. "I'm going to the wedding because it's a show of support that costs me nothing. I've never thought of him as a dad, so I don't care. At his worst, he's a big blank. He's a disappointment. He gets a clean slate. That's my wedding present, a pass. It's the only decent move." "I shot my better angels," said Cheyenne. "They're angels. You can't kill them. If they were real, you could." Livy could feel Cheyenne's eyes burning holes in her ribs. She zipped her fly and flattened her pockets. "I have clothes if you want to borrow something," said Cheyenne. Livy froze for a second, then bent down to roll the cuffs, making sure they were perfectly even on both sides and all the way around. "I have a white shirt. It has buttons. I can tuck it in," she said. "What do you think his bride will be like?" asked Cheyenne. "A full-blown voodoo narcissist like him." "Oh no, he couldn't take the competition. I predict Anglo-Geisha." "Oh, I can see that," said Livy. "We should at least get drunk before we go." "I'd rather do it on his dime," said Livy. "You know, I'll bet inviting us isn't even his idea. I'll bet it's the bride's." Livy smiled. "Maybe he has cancer, and his doctor warned him that guilt suppresses the immune system." Cheyenne propelled herself off the stove with her back foot. "Yes," she said. "No." She held up her hand. "Wait," she said. "I have it. He found God, and God said unto him," Cheyenne threw her arms wide and boomed, "Stop being such a dick! A dick, a dick. Echo, echo, echo." Neither sister had seen their father since they were 14. The wedding invitation had arrived only 2 weeks before the date of the ceremony, just on the heels of Cheyenne's reappearance, something their mother Kirsten considered prophetic. It was obvious from the short window that the decision to include them was, at best, the result of a long debate, or at worst, an afterthought. Their initial instinct had been to ignore it, and the invitation was repurposed as a coaster for days before it was seriously considered. But in the end, they could not ignore it. It tapped at a hidden door. "Shh, he is a king in a castle. He has only stashed us away in the village to keep us safe. Someday he will call for us, claim us, and make everything right. I kind of understand why we're going to the wedding, said Cheyenne, but why is Mom going? For her own reasons, without a doubt. Livy's eyes met Cheyenne's for a second, then moved to the clock. What time is she picking you up? A car honked outside. Now, said Cheyenne. Kirsten's 20-year-old Toyota was stopped in the middle of the street with the hazards on blocking half the road. She was wearing a black velvet camisole and a long black skirt and a black cardigan. There was a ring on every finger and totemic silver jewelry hung around her neck. Tiny zircon studs pierced the indigo blue sun and crescent moon tattooed on her earlobes. Cheyenne took one look at her and knew that her mother was totally prepared to make an awkward situation more awkward. Get in or we'll miss the ferry, said Kirsten. The dashboard of Kirsten's car rattled with the engine. Keep the windows rolled down, she said. The defroster doesn't work. Let's skip ahead to a couple of things. As girls, they'd been fed the fairy tale. Two women loved the same man. One wanted a baby and the other wanted to chase the North Star. Each became pregnant, so they made a plan. The one who wanted the baby would take both children, and the one who wanted the North Star would continue on. The first mother was happy and the second mother was happy. But which daughter is which? It drove Livy and Cheyenne fucking batshit crazy. Kirsten had never given them a name or a way to reach the other woman. She refused to say which girl belonged to which mother. And Livy and Cheyenne had never been able to figure it out. Each had Kirsten's black hair and mannerisms, her broad shoulders, but so did a lot of people. Mostly, they looked like their father, Cyril, who also had black hair. Every now and then, though, one sister would see something in the other and think, that's totally her mouth. But they could never be certain. Paperwork didn't clarify anything either. Theirs was a home birth, and Kirsten was listed as the mother on both birth certificates. When they finally got the real story, it didn't help because it wasn't much different from the fairy tale version. Kirsten met Cyril when they were in grad school. When he was in grad school, they had an open relationship, and then Cyril fell in love with a girl who was new to town. The girl got pregnant. Kirsten and her became friends not long after. One of them was ready for a baby and one was not, so they struck a deal over a bottle of wine and some tosses of the I Ching. One woman became a mother of two girls and the other became a Buddhist nun. Cyril, not as much of a polyamorous adventurer as he originally thought, did not stick around, and Kirsten raised the girls alone. And I'm going to read one last short section because I have a friend named Kirsten who was a reader on this book, and she may or may not be on this, but I'm going to read this in case she is, because I used to drive for Radio Cab, and she will. This is a different character, Crown Victoria. Essex didn't have a steady lease. If he wanted to drive, he had to go down and ask for a cab, put his name on the list, hang out in the tunnel for hours, and wait for the dispatchers to call out a number for the cab he could take. There were rules, though. You couldn't leave and come back, even if you were at the bottom of the roster, because it wasn't a first come, first served kind of thing. The list was just so they didn't forget you existed. They went down according to their own logic. Let me see. Yeah, he's good. Give him 112. Okay, he's got a sick kid. Give him 38. Oh, no fucking way. He wrecked last week. No, he was totally caught stacking. No, oh, definitely not. Oh, man, she is cute. Give her number 26. Oh, her? Oh, she is totally cute. Give her 122. And God, brother, are you kidding me? Hot. 88. Luck or lightning could strike. Sometimes you got a free lease because the dispatchers didn't like the owner of your cab and comped it on a technicality. Sometimes you got charged a fee that didn't exist or were made to wait for hours on a cab that wasn't coming because they were curious to see how you would react. Once Essex spent a whole week driving around with a roasted chicken under his seat because the dispatch guys had a bet to see how long it would take for the pre-cooked bird to rot to the point where you could smell it. Sometimes Essex would slip into the dispatcher's office and listen to them tell stories. It was his favorite part of cab driving, watching the steady drivers pass through, the smooth-shaven Eritreans in press shirts and lemon cologne, the Caribbeans with thin gold chains, the middle-aged Persians with low voices and rich accents. Far from being a sacred sphere of enlightened multiculturalism, though, the dispatcher's office was the epicenter of unchecked stereotyping. Don't you people pray like 5 times a day? Where's your rug? Man, I don't know. I must have left it at the synagogue. Hey, amigo, ¿cómo está? I'm fucking Egyptian, you idiot. It was the kind of gloves-off diversity found the world over in places where people of different backgrounds actually live together. Anyway, I read that for Kirsten in case she's there.
Yay. I'm so thrilled, first of all, to be here with you tonight, but also because I loved this book. So to hear you read from it is like honestly a treat. So I'm very excited to be able to pick your brain about not only the book, but just like writing stuff in general, which I think is always just so fucking fun to talk about. As weird as it is right now to be talking about writing.
Yeah.
Uh, but just to kind of start things off, because there's so many different fascinating parts with this book, but like, right, it's been a hot minute since you've had like, been working on a novel, like when did Zazen come out? Like 2011? Is that when that
Yeah.
book came out? Yeah.
Yeah. Long time ago.
Yeah. So what is like, okay, like that was like a
So what
completely
the hell have I been doing?
no, not like what the hell have you been doing, but like, like how is this like process kind of different? Like, I read in the acknowledgments about like, like this was like a long process for you, and it felt like really like you had a lot of different kinds of conflicting feelings about, the process of creating this book and like what it means to make art right now, and like what, like what's like important and significant. So like for you, like what was like the overall like kind of structural process of like you putting this book together and thinking about it? Like, was it like, I obviously didn't have like a linear path towards creation. It was probably likely seemingly like kind of all over the place. So like, could you describe that like a little bit, like what that process looked like for you?
Sure. It looks like obsession when you're getting knocked off course constantly, and then having to sort of pick up the pieces. I started from the premise that like I sat down and thought, okay, what do I want to write next? And I had another novella. I had a novella that I was thinking about, taking and making into a novel or not. And then I had this. I thought about, well, what are the novels I really love? So what I really started with was the question is, what am I scared to write about?
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, what do I do really badly, and what am I scared to write about? And that was like the first two things I asked myself. I don't think I can write. I don't think I can write. I don't think I can write about love.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of one of the things that I thought about. And so like I can't stomach most love stories. Like, I mean, like they just, they reify so much that I want to tear apart that I can't, and but I didn't even mean love necessarily in love, but I was very nervous about that too, because, it's hard to, I knew that I thought about, okay, what are the novels that I love? What are the novels that like completely shaped me?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to admit, they were all the like 19th century, some 18th century, some early 20th century, but the big novels that were like, when the novel was the novel,
Right.
and that, I loved those things. They were the deepest experience I had of reading, and so I thought, well, how do you do that? And so I started with this idea, and I'm not the first or the only to think that was kind of like, what would my 19th century novel look like, and so I decided from the beginning that I made a choice that I was going to fail spectacularly. Basically, that I was just gonna like go for it, and so I was like, okay, this should be. So I started with like, what am I afraid to write about? What am I bad at? I'm gonna fail spectacularly. Let's go, And so it started, with that. But reality also was economics, right? Which is always a reality. Which was, I started writing on some stuff. I had some advance money. But, by the time I got advance money, of course, I had years of debt from writing the first book, I mean, so it was just kind of like,
yeah.
So everybody's like, you won an award and you got some advance money, you're finally fine. I'm like, no, I'm off to zero. It's great, And so, so then, I worked on some long form pieces, and I'd been doing that. And one of them, it's just interesting. Like one of them got spiked at the last minute and it went somewhere else, but it was like, you do 3 months of work and it was like a very low kill fee, what I mean? Like it was gone. And so I ended up spending a year having to hustle long form all the time and not being able to write. So there were periods when I was writing it where I'd have to go and do other things.
Right.
But more than that, it was a constant rediscovering of what the book was going to be. I was not intending to write a book this long. I was not intending to write you know, a lot of things that started to emerge from it. And then through the years, you know, it's just like Ferguson and, you know, like every shooting, whether it was like school shootings, because I was watching my kid grow up, like
Right.
she's the Sandy Hook generation. Like you know, I've never gone to an event at her school where I wasn't watching the doors. It's never happened.
Mhm.
You know, that's my entire experience is like anxiety attacks. And, you know, my kid is like, well, you know, there's like 2,000 people in my school, so the chances they're actually going to get to me is pretty low. I'm like, great, thank you. That's not helpful, but yes, I'm glad you're thinking that way.
Mhm.
So, but it was also just all the Black Lives Matter stuff, all of, you know, everything. And it just felt like I'd get my mental act together, I'd be writing, and then something would happen and I would just collapse.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I was just like, I quit. You know, like, what the hell am I doing this for? And that just went on and on. And time got strange. And yeah, it was hard. And then I think to tie this up, you know, the publisher I'd started with was not the publisher I ended up with. And that was, so then there was a period where it was like, I'm taking my, you know, I basically, I let go of my agent. I let go of that publisher. I said, I realize I owe you a whole bunch of money. I promise I'm going to try to find it. Let me go, you know, and I don't want to change my book from, I don't want to make it what you want. Let me go. And they did, you know, but I still owe them the money, right? Like, it wasn't like, you know, I was like, okay, go find the money. So I was like, okay, I got to go find the money. And then it was like a very hard track. And like, I ended up being very lucky with my agent, and then I got to go to Knopf, which is like the greatest thing in the world. But it was I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
I thought I had failed absolutely everything. And so it's just hard, that question about like, and then it got harder, right? Like right after 2015 or so, I was really not sure that writing what I was writing had any value to the world.
Yeah.
And you know, that was hard and as well. And then I've been working as an organizer for the last year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a very difficult thing. And I can imagine with like the upheaval of being like, okay, like, I don't know what I'm doing. Is it like significant? Like, where's my time best spent? Like,
That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
Yeah. So, and that can be like just so confusing. And then like in the midst of that to be like, okay, I'm going to like change like publishers and agents. Like, you're just like, okay, let's just do it all at one time. But like, I do think, I don't know, the book it's a beautiful book. It's like exploring so many things. That are like exciting to me. Like as a reader, like I know you're talking about the fact that this book is long, which I was like, well, this book is like a, you know, it's like a hefty book. It's still like a book that you're like deeply invested in as you're reading it. And like so much of that is because like as a reader, like we are oftentimes like looking for these specific kind of things. And for me, I'm always looking for these kind of like ideas of family. And this book is like doing so much with like very different like ideas of family and how those strands kind of like connect. And, you know, like a thing I've been thinking about a lot with regard to family narrative is the idea of like everybody in a family is an unreliable narrator, because we're all telling the same story for family, but they're not like the same, you know? And I was like, for a while I was thinking like family stories are like, they're like run up like this, like here's your story, here's mine. And I was like, that's not it. It's like, they touch at places, right? So like, here's where the story starts and here's where we separate, because here's like my version of it and yours, and then here's where it touches again. It's like this weird helix of touching. And this book has so many threads like that with regard to family. So like, I wanted to like ask you so many, because I was just thrilled to death with this idea of like the different kinds of like storylines with regard to family and how family functions and how they touch and move away. That like when you were writing it, like were you kind of conceiving it in this way of being like, okay, I want to know like the different narrative threads of family, or how did that sit with you thinking about like writing a family narrative? Because this is it's a family book. It's like, this is like such a huge important part of it. Like, right. It's like family, it's sisterhood and motherhood, and also family, and also history and lore and like lineage and these kinds of things. But writing family here, like how did that feel to you? And when you were like in the midst of writing it, like were there things that you were thinking about with regard to family?
I think it was a bit of a surprise to me that it was going to be a family story in the way that it became so. And I think it's just because the character of the mother, Kirsten, is just a very strong character. And So she came in a lot more. But I did decide from the beginning I wanted a character of that age range in the book, because I wanted an older perspective. And she's closer to my age, so you know, I knew I wanted to write about this period that I'm really interested in, what I think of as like the second coming of age, right? Which is, the way I look at it is like, you have all the ideas of who you were going to be and thought you were going to be in high school, or thought, you know, whatever. And I don't mean just your jobs. I mean like the idea of like the things you'd settle for and not settle for, or what you loved or don't, and what would be okay or not okay, what you put up with. And you like, you run along that track. And then you get to like 27, 28, 29, and you either, you know, there's a lot of paths that change them. Like that's a time when like artists quit doing art. That's when musicians quit. There's a whole big drop off right then about when musicians stop playing. And there's a whole big drop off when actors stop. There's a real big drop off when, you know, people who've been trying different things stop trying them. And it's not just economics. It's like, because there's status conferred to all of that as well. So you pass these ages, and it's just like people start looking at you like, well, you know, when are you going to grow up? Like there's this sense that, you know, nothing's ever going to happen for you. And I think that it's also a time where, you know, people get married, people, you know, people just sort of sort themselves out into some things. And but it's also, there's that window where that hasn't happened and you're not sure. And you get this incredibly fertile moment to say, who do I want to be? Right? Do I still want to be what I thought I wanted to be? And again, I don't mean like a job necessarily. Do I still hold the same idea of beauty and terror that I had? Like, do I still want to be what I thought I wanted to be? And then you go, what if it means I'll be obscure and broke and not have any of the things other people have? Do I still want to be that? These are characters who are kind of like, yeah, kind of like, you know, I mean, they're on that moment. So to me, that's like that second coming of age. It's just like, it's really about status. And what you do with, one of the terms I absolutely fucking hate is adulting. I know I'm probably offending half the room with that, so forgive me, but it's just like this idea, like I'm being an adult now, you know, and it's just, no, you're just talking about capitalist economics, you know what I mean? It's just like, now you have you're the means of production are closer at hand, you know, be like, what do you mean you're an adult now?
Right.
You know? Yeah, I mean, like, show me you're an adult when you can like show me an emotional adulthood, you know what I mean? Really, very, you know, 401k is like, I just don't. But then on the other hand, I probably should. So that's about me.
No, that's extremely fair. I think that, that like you keep saying like this kind of thing about being like, you know, like, is this who I saw myself as being? And I don't think that that's anything necessarily having to do with profession. It's like who this like kind of idea of like envision of the self, right? Like, we kind of like grow and get older and kind of form and have this idea of like who we are integrally as people. And then like we have these kind of come to Jesus, to use like a phrase, but like of like this like kind of like moments of like partial clarity where we're having like, you know, is this who I am? Like, what am I? Like, who have I kind of constructed myself as? So I love that, especially in the idea of like family and how people relate to each other too.
Well, it's also the place where it's like, well, yep, potential now doesn't count. It is the number one. It's like, okay, potential, you get no points for potential anymore. Like, and it's all about doing it. So that's the other thing. And that's hard for people. People like go into all sorts of places to not risk that.
Yeah. I mean, because I think it's like a hard kind of like specific look into the interior, which many of us struggle with. I don't think that's ever an easy thing that people like have like access to. It's like, who are you like actually, what do you actually want, and what are you willing to do, and like, you know, who are you actually, like your limitations, right? Kind of like looking and seeing like how like what your like life is actually maybe going to look like, and are you okay with it, like that kind of idea. There's like so much of that too, I think, is connected with this kind of movement through life. And like there's such a movement in general, like in this book, right? Like there's like this kind of like, you know, the book starts off in Seattle. It's like this, and it's, your place writing is so beautiful. Like even reading about Seattle and reading about like the Pacific Northwest is like, wow, it's like this gorgeous place writing. And as like a person who like really connects with place writing, that was like lovely to read that kind of stuff. But it's not like, right, there's like Kirsten stays there like stationary is kind of like a fixed kind of locus, but like the way that people move like out and away in this book and then also travel through place like felt like such momentum, especially in the ways in which they did those kinds of things. So like when you were, and how you couch like so much of this movement is like also here's like historical context within like the movement through space, and also here's how different people are moving, right? Like Livy is doing like a lot of like ship work and like here's what it's like in terms of movement like in the sea and like moving along this way. Cheyenne is like moving across the country like in a car in this kind of way, and here's what this looks like in this specific, her specifically, like, you know, like Essex trying to figure out like, you know, movement in this way where he's like, I don't want to have to make the choices anymore and have somebody else like make the choices for me, and here's how I'm moving and I don't have decisions about it. Like, so writing like movement, like you write about all these different places, and I was like, this is such a place book, but it's so many different kinds of places. Like, so I wanted to ask you very specifically about the writing of place. Like, I don't know, specifically, I mean, I want to ask you so much about research, about the ship stuff, but because the librarian in me can't like handle it, but I was like, I have to know. But the stuff with Cheyenne was fascinating to me. I love this car trip of like, kind of like, I guess impulsively, I'm doing it. I've got a tub of peanut butter and I'm going like across and I don't really know what I'm doing. And then to wind up in these kind of like spaces where it's like almost feels like surreal, like a castle in the landscape in Texas. Like, so like you writing about place, like what was that kind of like for you? Like in writing that book, did it feel like that kind of movement for you? Like what was it like kind of like interpreted in the book?
I mean, I always have a little bit of trouble. I think you have a leg up on here. First of all, you're a librarian, which is cooler than anything that's fun. You know, but you have a leg up in the sense that I think that you know, you're such a strong reader as well as a writer. And when I'm writing my own work, I can't tell what people are following that they're interested in, right? Yeah. Like I'm following my own interests. And sometimes people are like, well, that was fascinating. Other times they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, and I can't tell the difference between those things. Those things are like right beside there for me. So with place and with like where I was following momentum is, you know, in a lot of different arcs that probably aren't, you know, I mean, I have characters that I don't know if they arc as much as double down sometimes, you know, it's and
that's very like human though, don't you? That's like a very human reaction.
So place to me though is it's more about the inextricability and the inextricability of history. And this question of, I mean, these are characters that know that, you know, they're born on stolen land. They understand a little bit of like the context of what America is. And they're also trying to live a free life that they were like, you know, they have breath in their bodies and they want to be free too. And that sense of like where place is, like where is their status? Who is their parentage? If I had a different history, could I have a different future? You know, can I rewrite it? Can I, you know, can I find, and I also had this idea where I was sort of thinking about like, what if there was, you know, what if there was instead of, you know, you talk about founding fathers and like what, you know, what would, in some ways I looked at Kirsten as somebody forming a new founding history, right? Mm-hmm. She has cut off all ties with her family. Yeah. That you find out and just left. She's like, I'm not from there. She told the kids they were immigrants. There's a very small part you find out later, but she told the kids they were immigrants when they were little because they came, she decided the mental territory her parents, you know, lived in was another fucking country. And they were not going back because the land was here, you know? So, yeah. I mean, I think there is this reinvention, but also all the problems of reinvention that gets in. And place to me is, it's a character, it's not a setting. Mm-hmm. And really is, and that means who's lived there, that means what happened there, that means the land, the color, you know, it's just,
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. That's definitely like how I think about place, like when I'm thinking about like, right, the idea that like, right, it has like it's sentient and has like this entire lived history that does not like, just like our like kind of like trek across space, or there are our small amount of time like lived in a place is like just part of that bigger whole of like what place actually is, because place is like so much bigger than
Right.
us. Like obviously it's like the most like important character because it's like the most like actual history and lived experience. And that makes like a ton of sense to me.
And places, you know, if you take sort of Emerson's, you know, or Dewey, or, you know, places is reeled through being experienced in a different way. So who experienced it before and what happened there is
Yeah.
part of it. You know, I don't think it's separate.
Yeah. I want to remind everybody, like, put the, if like, we're going to open up for questions at the end. So like, go ahead. There's a little Q&A down at the bottom. You can click it and put a question in for Vanessa about the book.
Yeah, if you haven't like completely exhausted anything you want to know about.
Listen, there's a lot. I have a whole ass list of questions to ask you. Oh wait, let's go back to the thing though, because I really wanted to ask you so much. Like, as a person, like when I was writing, I mean, I am a librarian, and so like research is like, oh, like it's like I kind of almost get off on research. I love that shit. So like writing like Mostly Dead things for me, I was doing so much like intensive research on taxidermy. This book has so much like specific kind.
That's amazing in that book.
Thank you. You have so much like very specific information in this book where I was like, this is like knowledge that I would be like, this is like firsthand knowledge, it felt like to me. Some of that was like, you kind of answered where I was like, the taxi cab stuff with Essex, I was like, this is stuff that feels like firsthand. I feel like this is like the kind of information where I was like so involved in it because I was like, this is so, even I was like, is this well researched? Is this like a lived experience? Like, do you know how it is? But then the stuff with Livy and the ships and like what that looks like, especially when it comes to the point where she's on like the tall ship, or like, and what that looks like and how it differs from other things. Like, what was like the process for you of that? Because I was fascinated by all of that. It was, first of all, it's gorgeous, but like, what was the process of like writing it and like kind of coming to that?
So with the cab driving, I drove night cab for Radio
Yeah.
Cab for about a year and a half. That was not stellar. And for the tall ship, I worked on a tall ship for.
Did you really?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I was. That's.
Yeah, I was no great, you know, tall ship, but no, you know, the thing is, I talked my way onto the boat. It was supposed to like. The thing that was the best part about it was the waiver I had to sign about death. I basically got them to waive the sail trainee fee, waive a bunch of stuff. It was past a deadline. They were like, meet me in Green Bay. I did that. I had to like bribe a doctor to sign off on something without seeing me. Thank you, OSHU Richmond Clinic. I will not say it again. Anyway, by like moving some things around. I had to do a lot of things because I had 2 days to figure it out and to get there. And one of the things I had was they had sent me this waiver, right? They're like, okay, you got to sign this. And on this, you know, it was kind of like, you know, you will not hold us harmless. You know, you will hold us harmless if you die.
Yeah, yeah.
But the thing is, they went into depth about the ways you could die. They had decided that they were going to list them all just so you really got what you were getting onto. And
what are some examples like on the list of like how you could die?
You know, they should have done the list of what you can't die from.
Right, yeah.
More appropriate. No, it was they were great. They were fantastic, but it was like a list of, well, you fall off the rigging. You know, you're 2 days out a lot of times. There's not, you know, there's nobody coming. There's not, you know, it says like, we don't have a ship surgeon, you know, this isn't like you fall and break a femur. You fall and break a femur, it may be days until we get you somewhere, you know, and if you have to get life flighted and we can even do that, you know, you're paying for it. You're not covered under the Jones Act because we're your sail trainee officially, you know what I mean? So there's all these kinds of ways. But you know, you go up on the rigging, it's like, you know, you go up 118 feet, 125 feet. And then what's even scarier I found is, you know, when you're working aloft like that, it's, you know, it's scary. And I had some experiences that were very frightening to me. But when you go out on the yard, it's much scarier. It's weird. It's harder to be over. The yard was big enough that like when you go all the way out, in the way the lines go, it's getting closer and closer, so that you're getting higher and higher. So your center of gravity is way above. So you're leaning kind of like, if this is the yard and you're working, you're gonna be pressing against the lines and then leaning this way to balance. Yeah. And so very anti-intuitive. Like you don't really like the feeling of your head going like this at 118 feet.
No.
As you're all the way out there, you're also over the water. Like you're no longer over the ship.
Right.
So, I guess the most dramatic thing that happened to me was I was up on the Tgallant and I had not clipped in, nobody clipped in, and we got hit by a freak wave train on the beam, and it was like a metronome. It just went like this because the boat I was on, it was very, very top heavy, and so it had a 60-foot swing for 6 minutes because it just kept getting hit by the wave train. So I was clinging on for life, and I realized I was going to throw up on everybody. And person who, because you do that for 6 minutes, and like if the yards are cracking, it was terrifying. Two carronades broke loose on deck, like 1,600-pound carronades, and were like rolling. So like I was the least of people's concerns, right? Like so.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, we're holding on, and it was somewhat terrorizing. And my friend who was up there with me, who's a really good tall ship sailor, said I could throw up on him, and I thought that was one of the kindest things he ever said to me. He's just like, you can throw up on me if you're afraid to throw up on the captain, because the captain was right down below. So I didn't throw up on him,
Wow. I also love the image of like that being like a metronome, like the idea of it like moving that kind of way, because like that there's like a part of like in the book where it's like they're up there and they have to like untangle something and they're up really high, and Lydia's already like dealt with like a lot of like had a fear of going up really high, and the actual like intensity of what that felt like reading the section of her being up there and like what it's like to almost be nearly upside down to try and do some stuff was like it felt so like, it felt like, wow, this is a thing. I feel like I was like I don't even know how you do the research to write this, so it makes like a ton of sense that you actually
write it.
I was like, oh shit.
But the fishing boat stuff, my friend Kirsten fishes in Alaska, and I knew what kind of boat I was writing, and I understand that. So the question about research is the research pieces. I do research. The research pieces for me are all about how can I understand the physical space I'm in.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's really about how I throw out the things I don't need. I also had to talk to Marines.
Yeah, was that like a part where like, because there's like such specific parts of like place where I'm like, this is like feels so thoroughly investigated and thoroughly like care was given to like how much is going into like what these things are actually like.
It's anxiety. It's anxiety. I have a terror of getting things wrong, and when I'm doing nonfiction, I like fact check everything 90 million ways, and I'm so paranoid about it. Like to me, the hardest part of a piece is just waiting to get that 100% off the fact check.
I mean, it reads as though, I'm like getting a thing that they want me to do. I had like, I didn't get to, like, I'm just going to send you an email with all my questions, and then because we're not going to get to them.
I think we can say that I'm at fault for talking too much.
No, I wish we were in person, just because I feel like it would be nice to like be able to like talk about everything. But like, I'm gonna open up the questions because people have asked them, so that way you can like answer the Q&A stuff. Let's see. Let me pick some, and then we'll answer them. Let's see. Okay. Oh, like narration. You had like somebody narrate this book. Zazen narrated this book. If you could have had anyone narrate your book, living or dead, who would it be? Like if you could pick someone to narrate.
I think Exie did a great job. I got to talk to her a bunch, and I actually really, really enjoyed her narration. So I'd have to look at a second choice. I don't know. I've never, I'd like to have Natasha Lyonne do anything.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, that's a great answer.
She's like,
terrific.
Like my fantasy Cheyenne,
Honestly, wow, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh shit, that's like terrific.
If we're gonna pick the two like Hollywood stand-ins for Cheyenne and Livy, I would do Phoebe, was it Walbridge? Am I saying that right? Phoebe Walbridge for Livy. And I would So I don't know. Either one of them could narrate.
Yeah. I love that. Wow, what a great answer, Natasha Lyonne. That's fucking terrific. Okay, the state of our world seems to mirror that of Zazen more and more each day. Any hopeful insight from the author who envisioned a society in major distress? No, like just a softball question
here. No, when I was touring with Zazen, I would get asked questions like, "What's the meaning of time?" Like, it got weird. Like, there were things I would get asked that were very, very heavy, because a lot of times I was meeting people in distress, and because they related to that character in that moment, and I do too. I used to feel frustrated that people called it dystopian, because to me it was not dystopian, it was what was happening. And it was merely figurative. It wasn't. So in some ways, it prepares me. I've talked to a couple of my friends who have a similar background, and there is also in this moment, like, several of us have this kind of, I won't call it calm, but slightly, it's sort of the calm of knowing you're not crazy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I feel like for some of us, like, we've been living in this moment for a long time. Like, whether or not it's like fully manifest everywhere, like, all of this has been there, and if you're very aware of it, and you've been very aware of it for a very long time, the fact that it's now something everybody's talking about, there's a sort of reassurance in that. You've practiced living in these moments, and on the other hand, it's a totally new moment. I do have hope of, I think of hope as not something that's sort of like faith or random. I think of it as disciplined. I think of it as a disciplined devotion to what things can be.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's the way that I think about it. It's a world in distress. I mean, it's always better to see the truth than not see the truth. I think we're going to have to make a lot of things new. And at the same time, I worry that there's a lot of burn it down culture that I find personally lazy. Right?
Yeah.
Where it's like the laziest form of organizing a lot of times is kind of like, well, we'll just blow it up and then people will have to think better. And it's like, have a plan, please. You know what I mean? It's just, so I get a little bit frustrated with that.
I think the idea then too.
I'm not talking about like violence, not violence in the protests or anything.
No.
I'm just talking about a sort of lack of, and there is a way in which when you do that, you're saying, when do I get to stop caring and quit? It's the laziest organizing strategy, but I also think, nobody knows what to do.
No, I mean, but I think that's like a big part of like what you're doing.
And so I think a little bit more benefit of the doubt and human empathy around the fact that really people don't know.
People don't know. I think that's
certain evil people who really do know. And,
well, sure, there's some like, we all understand that, like, but I think the idea of like the blow it up kind of conversation is really fascinating to me, because I think there's the idea that like, right, we're gonna blow it up and then we'll know what it'll be. And I was like, already people don't know now. So I mean, from a librarian standpoint, like the idea of like the kind of like facilitating like ongoing education about like what things can be or could turn into, and like ongoing kind of communication about stuff is really significant and important. And like a lot of like a turn in terms of like how conversation gets parsed and processed now is in these platforms that don't facilitate like a lot of like communication in ways that like need to happen, right? Like platforms where, like having a conversation about extremely difficult topics and hard stuff to deal with, or it's on a platform where it's like it's like call and response necessarily, and not like some kind of dialogue, and that's really difficult. So a blow it up standpoint like doesn't like kind of encompass the idea of like trying to like know and learn or like kind of accommodate for the stupidity of people in this kind of way. And
I think it's always usually the people who have a blow it up without a plan standpoint feel pretty comfortable that they're not going to suffer the cost of that. But then there are things like, I mean, you can argue for actually blowing stuff up at times, like, but how
sure, This is a very anarchist discussion. Oh, I have to ask you more questions. I'm like being so bad. I just want to like monopolize your time. But okay, Robert Frost wrote that home is where they have to take you in. Is family like that? And I'll couch it with response to the book, like, you know, because this is a book of like built family, right? So like, does it feel like that to you, like in terms of like how you think about family, but also maybe like throughout the discourse of this particular novel?
In the novel, I do feel that it is a family that knows they can come back.
Mm-hmm.
Every character has a really, really deadly relationship with pride, but it affects them all very differently.
Mm-hmm.
And but they are really a family, and there is, you know, a sense that you can go very far off grid and you can still show up. Like Cheyenne in the beginning of the novel has been gone for some years, and she's really barely been in touch with anybody. Mm-hmm. And then she shows up. Mm-hmm. And it's, so I think that it is where they have to take you in. You know, that's probably true, you know.
I mean, it is very like, because one of my favorite parts of the book, I'm not trying to like do like spoilers for your book on here, like, because I was like, I'm very fascinated with this whole book, but especially the relationship between the sisters, like Livy and Cheyenne, like, right, like, because they're constantly like butting heads and at odds. I love the descriptions of them as like very young children too, and how combative they are with each other, which feels like extremely realistic for like how that would be. And like, but also trying to like kind of looking each other like askance all the time, to be like trying to see like, you know, are you this mom or am I, like, you know, where do we fit inside of like who we are? And so then like also just like the difference was between them as people, right? Like Cheyenne, like at the beginning, like staying with Livy, and then like her encouraging her to go out on this like original road trip out, and then like the decision that Livy makes to kind of like peace out and like leave her there, and like what that looks like. And then of course they're still sisters and the things like that. Like I was like really fascinated with that, like, because I felt like I was like, this is like so legitimately sisters.
Yeah, I have two friends who are sisters, and they both have shown me scars on their body that came from each other.
Yes. I feel like that's like, I mean, because I have like a sister who's like 8 years younger than me. And like, I feel like so many of our stories are about like some kind of like pain inflicted, either intentional or unintentional, and maybe physical and maybe not physical, and how those things like manifest. So like seeing like how the two, like Livy and Cheyenne, kind of orbit each other like throughout this, because there's like, right, like the kind of like the way that stuff happens in this book is like the lines like cross, and here's where I am and here's where you are, and then we cross and meet and move. There's also a lot of objects in this. I have so many questions. There's like so many objects in this book that I'm fascinated with, like the necklace that Livy has of Cheyenne's that she keeps, and like the kind of talisman of that, like the idea of like keeping it and like what that looks like. Like, were you thinking about, because there's like also the letters too from like the other mother, when you were like writing the book, were you thinking about things like objects and things like that, like just like, or did they just like kind of migrate their way into the book?
They migrate. I try not to know what I'm doing.
I do the same thing too, though. I love like not know. I like the surprise of stuff. Sometimes I feel like if I know what I'm gonna write, I'm so bored, or like I don't write it.
You gotta be able to keep your interest in the work going forward, and like not boring yourself is the number one thing to keep it.
I feel like it's really easy to bore ourselves as writers, right? Like it's like super easy to bore ourselves. So I love the idea of like, first of all, not knowing. And sometimes if I feel like I do have an idea in my head, then I definitely am not writing that. Like if I like say like, well, this is the thing I'm gonna write about, then I absolutely like my brain goes and kind of like skirts around it. Yeah.
And if anybody ever makes a suggestion to me, I'm like, well, that is exactly what I will not do. It's kind of like that was a robin's egg and you touched it and now I will never go back, you know. And I don't know why, but it's just the way I am. So
no, I definitely understand that. I feel that way too.
In writing, I don't feel that way in other areas, but
yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. Okay. This question, what is your writing community like? Like, do you have a writing community? Do you have like a group that you write like towards? No. Are you a solitary writer? Are you very like alone and kind of working? Like, what is your writing community like?
I'm solitary to a point, and then I have, you know, a couple of friends that I share work or rather that so actually I have readers who are friends of mine, Karen, Alex Nay, other, Sasha, other people at different times, who just read it and they don't necessarily tell me much. It just gives me a sense of like, of giving it to someone, you know, and to be less alone in the experience. But I'll say like, did you like this? And they'll say, yeah, that was good. That sounds good. Let me see some more. You know what I mean? And like, that's it. Like, it's not a, what did you think of, unless, so even it's an interesting thing because it's more just about giving me a sense of wanting to have someone to surprise with it, like, because I'm writing and I'm thinking, I want the reader to feel this, like, would it be a surprise, right? So I want to like give it to someone. And then there are times later on where like, I'm stuck or something. Like Lydia read some stuff, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Where I just was like, okay, I gotta send it. But I'm very much a one-to-one person and not a writing group person.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense too, especially like if you're talking about writing and the capacity that you're writing, because I'm like not a person that outlines either. Like outlines like don't make sense to me. Like, but like again, like part of like what makes like writing and reading even exciting to me is like the different processes that people have. So the understanding, like I don't work that kind of way, like maybe other people do, has always been like, like wouldn't it be so fucking boring if we all wrote books the exact same way? They would be like the most boring books ever. But yeah, there's just so much here that like unpack. Like, I don't know. I love how you like, you go from these like, I know they said like, they're like, they're trying to they want to like me to wrap it up. I want to ask you 1,000 more questions. But like, I will say this one last thing before I let them hop back on. Let them. Thank you, Powells. You're wonderful. Like your chapters, like especially when you're like doing like the historical context of place, or we're talking about different things, like how you move from this like expansive thing of that to like go down to the granular level, and here's like the person here who's like in the granular level and their like small experience here with it, which feels so intrinsically human to me. And this book like at its core felt like people, and like how people like love and hurt and like want to like understand themselves and like their space, their place in things. And it's a gorgeous look at like how that can look, and like what it can be in the greater scheme of things, and also like how messy it is. And I just love things that are like allowing the messiness. So okay, I will give it up now. I will give it back to Powell's.
Thanks for doing this. Thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for everyone for joining us for tonight's event. It was a pleasure to host Vanessa Veselka, Kristen Arnett, and welcome all of you. Please consider purchasing a copy of The Great Offshore Grounds by visiting us at powells.com. And we look forward to seeing you at another one of our events again soon. Take care until then.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. You're wonderful.
Bye. Thanks, Kristen. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Kristen and Vanessa. This was great.
Bye.
Bye.